The federal economic cliff, America's fast track to economic self-destruction. I'd like to take a bird's eye view of what should be the number one issue in our political discussion today, because if we don't address it and address it rather quickly, it doesn't matter what else we argue about or disagree about, what else is passed or fails to pass, America as a nation will cease to exist or have any relevance on the national stage or the local stage. Here is the U.S. national debt, 35 trillion plus and growing by the second. I'd like to point to the bottom line here, where in 1960 we had 52.51% federal debt to GDP ratio. That was down to 34.65% in 1980. According to this chart, it was 56.56% in 2000. But in another discussion, we can take a look at what the contractor with America, Newt Gingrich, and the House Republicans actually accomplished in concert with President Clinton, as for 3 years in a row at least, and perhaps more, there were actually surpluses. And there was discussion, even as I understand it from some comments I heard Newt Gingrich make in a discussion. He almost made the comments in passing that before Clinton left office, before Reagan took office, and the deficit started growing again, there was actually meetings being held as to what the U.S. was going to do if, in fact, all the debt were paid off and they had surpluses. How would they handle that? Restock the Social Security trust fund? What exactly would they do? How would they address that? Well, as it turned out, that proved to be an unnecessary worry as quickly political parties on both sides of the aisle learned how to give the other side what they wanted in exchange for what they wanted. As a result, everybody got what they wanted, except for, in the long run, the American people, as now our debt to GDP ratio is 122.96% and growing. Total outlays of $6.1 trillion and total revenues of $4.4 trillion in 2023. That means that we have a $1.7 trillion deficit, which is the amount of our discretionary spending. The mandatory spending, Social Security, healthcare, etc., is $3.8 trillion. And the interest on our debt, when this chart was made, I believe it was around March or April of 2024 that this actually came out from the Congressional Budget Office. The net interest was $0.7 trillion, so $700 billion was being paid just on the interest of our outstanding debt. And that, I believe, is now approaching, if not past, $1 trillion a year being spent simply on the interest for our $35 trillion plus and growing federal debt. Some major areas of concern that I would suggest we need to get honest about and deal with. First, healthcare cost. We need to set up a system where you are not simply provided with whatever care is available, but we have fixed payments and you shop for the health care that you need in accordance with the budget that is available to you. Budgeted military spending. We need to get a handle on our spending. This may seem like an odd thing to talk about, as we have two wars going on, each of which threaten to turn into World War III. But I would suggest that elsewhere I've talked about, if we actually had managed our affairs better at home and abroad over the last 40, 50 years, we wouldn't be facing the crises that we're facing on the world stage today. And we are spending more, I believe, than the next 10 or 12 nations combined on military budget. And the U.S. honestly has never been able to afford that. It certainly cannot afford to do that any longer. Extra budgetary military spending, all the money that we spend, for example, on the two wars, the conflicts that I mentioned earlier that we are not officially declared combatants in, and yet we've spent literally hundreds of billions of dollars in support of the efforts in those wars. But those issues need to be addressed. Another thing is Social Security. I know President Trump has said that he's not going to touch Social Security or Medicare or anything, but there's absolutely no way to address our current federal deficit crisis, our current federal debt crisis, without addressing Social Security. And then finally, the tax code. We have a tax code that favors investment, 401k type stuff, stock market type stuff over a 9 to 5 job or a 9 to 9 job, whatever the job happens to be, actual labor. And we need to reevaluate our tax code and create a tax code that doesn't favor or target any particular class of citizens, but that actually is simply a tax code that says if you make this much, you're going to pay this much. And people will move up and down on the tax code based on their income in any given year. And we need to actually reevaluate how we qualify or define income to address the idea that millionaires and multimillionaires and billionaires are paying less as a percentage of their income or the funds which they have available to them to spend on any given year than your average Joe just working 9 to 5. Some steps that we could take to begin to address these: timely submission and approval of the budget. It's a shame on Congress and the executive branch, the president, that it's been decades since there's been an actual budget process followed as outlined in the law. And we need to get our house in order. Not that there aren't other issues that Congress has to deal with, but they need to prioritize the budget again. No extra budgetary spending without supermajority approval, including congressional declaration of war for military financing for activities outside the United States. But we should not be either funding or sending material supplies to areas of conflict, to nations in conflict, without the U.S. formally declaring our participation in that conflict. We don't have the money for it. We don't have the moral authority for it. And we need to just reevaluate our whole approach to engaging with the world at large. We need to control Washington's revolving doors. We have too many people from top to bottom in Washington who may move out of Washington, the circles of Washington, into places of influence in the business world and elsewhere, or as lobbyists, and so that we have just a big slush fund for those who find themselves caught in that pool of influence and opportunity. And so we need to install some strict guidelines for what opportunities will be available to those who have decided to serve in Washington. Delegate oversight responsibilities. Our Congress people, liberal and conservative, Republican and Democrat, are spending too much time doing oversight activity and investigating things rather than actually working together to develop laws that address the issues that face us as a nation, starting with a budget plan. And encourage in-person engagement. I think particularly with COVID and work from home and all that went on during that period, the value, the importance of people sitting together at lunch and spending time together outside of the halls or the C-SPAN opportunities in their commissions and stuff, where the other sides of the aisle are the enemy, and there's constant bickering and little to do with whatever the committee is actually supposed to be doing, has fostered an environment in which our leaders simply don't know how to work together to negotiate and to compromise constructively in order to address the issues that need to be addressed. So just some quick thoughts on what I think is actually the most important issue that needs to be addressed, namely how in the world we're going to get our spending under control before our mountain of debt absolutely overwhelms not only the United States, but the degree to which the world is dependent on the United States financial situation, the world at large. Thank you very much. Look forward to hearing what you have to say. Bye-bye. Thank you very much for your time. I've got a couple other videos listed here if you'd like to take a look at those. And as I'd like to discuss issues related to politics, religion, society, and how in the world we're supposed to understand ourselves and life in the world. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.